Little did we know it, but scrappy games of the past opened our eyes to what the future could be. Greater St. Louis, Missouri now boasts the largest indoor pickleball and paddle complex in the world. It's been a big deal. The local press, aficionados, and amateur players of both sports have offered up lofty praise. They say that the indoor facility ranks as nothing less than world-class, a rival to any to be found across the country or around the globe. And to be clear, there's no denying that the structure dubbed Paddle and Pickle is impressive, with its 14 lavishly appointed indoor courts and trappings that include a bar and pro shop. For me, however, as a native of the city's north side, marvels like these send my memory hurtling back to my youth and a past when games, touch football, kickball, and dodgeball, to name a few, had less sheen. The trappings were modest. They were often fueled on nothing more than imagination, scraps, and ingenuity. The facilities we had and the equipment we used were makeshift, while the expanse of the competition ran as broad or as narrow as the mind's eye. Little did we know, but the games that filled days drenched in sunlight and cloaked in stifling humidity were keepsakes. Over time, our parents and grandparents lovingly shaped these same games as vessels of culture to pass ahead. Each was a precious tincture brimming with essential lessons about how our predecessors understood and navigated life. In a quiet, lasting way, the laughter, the tension, the smack talk, boastful strutting, and even the hangdog moping shaped our outlook for years to come. Anthropologists are fond of saying that games, and sports as well, are anchored to intention. Societies conceive them to mimic life in miniature. The social scientist Johann Huizinga put it this way: it is through this playing that society expresses its interpretations of life and the world. Take his thinking a bit further. Whether as players or spectators, competition imperceptibly serves as a staging ground where we test our strength, will, mettle, and limits. Guidelines, boundaries, and rules, both explicit and unspoken, reflect the challenges we sense and the skills required to overcome them. The lessons learned from winning and losing teach us how to grab hold of destiny and shape it to our individual design. On the north side of St. Louis, each block had its own modest coliseum where all manner of competitive sport was staged. It was simply the alley that ran behind the houses where we lived. A modest, even battered surface, the alley stretched past our backyards away from the rumble of the streets, such as Hamilton, Labadie, Kossuth, Marcus, or Margaretta. North St. Louis gamesmanship was anchored here on an all-purpose surface that we molded into a versatile playing field for any occasion. Urban planners meant it to provide access to the garages where the family car was parked. Posses of kids like me in neighborhoods like the Ville, Penrose, Fairground, O'Fallon, meanwhile, had another purpose in mind. The hazards be damned. The surface was less than ideal and often flawed. The pavement was pocked and uneven. Footing was iffy. Down the center of the alley flowed a steady current of water, runoff from rainwater or lawn sprinklers. Occasionally, it swelled to a small torrent, one that was channeled by a gully near where I grew up at the intersection of Penrose and Shreve. Between craters and divots lay dangers, strewn gravel and occasional shards of broken glass. Weeds jumped into cracks to set down root, not only where the edges came up to backyard gates, but sometimes down the very middle. Yet for all its imperfections, the alley beat the street because cars drove through irregularly, especially during summer days when our parents were busy at work or home and we were set out to play until dinner time. Sparse car traffic meant fewer interruptions for rough-and-tumble neighborhood combatants. Another big plus was just how malleable the alley turned out to be. For football, all we had to do was determine which fence, gate, or garage on which property marked the end zone, and 7 points. The sole trick here was to keep from stumbling into metal garage doors, which thundered like symphonic timpani when you tripped and collided into them. If the contest du jour was basketball, we could ready the blacktop in no more than 30 minutes. For our portion of the alleyway closest to Shreve, a few minor touches were all it took. One of us hacksawed the top 2 inches off a milk crate to create a hoop in a jiffy. Another of us brought a ladder to climb, while the tallest nailed the crate remnant to a wooden telephone pole, sometimes 10 feet above the asphalt, but then again maybe 11 or even 9 feet high. No matter. Game on. The most elaborate alley game on the north side was called cork, short for corkball, a formal game white St. Louisans conjured up maybe 70 years earlier. Corkball, the hallowed orthodox version, was the city's equivalent of stickball, equal parts batting practice and fantasy baseball. Our version cork, like its forerunner, had quirks aplenty and a comically long scroll of rules. It required small sides, just a pitcher and a catcher for a complete team of 2, and a far cry from the 9 members required in baseball or softball. Runners were imaginary, their progress and scoring often determined by how far the batter hit the ball. The gear was quirky. The official version of cork had specialized equipment, shrunken facsimiles of baseball staples, including a ball the size of a robin's egg and a bat no thicker than a closet rod. In back alley laboratories on the north side, our cork went through a number of mutations, even while keeping fairly close to the original rules. My father's generation saw fit to tinker with the type of equipment they fashioned out of what was handy. Truncated broomsticks sometimes became bats. If you had enough saved up to buy tennis balls, you needed to ready them for play, wrapping them first in newspaper, setting a match, and burning off the fuzz. That left a surface of rust-colored stubble, tacky enough to send the ball on a drunken spin up or down in the hands of a seasoned pitcher. For the bare-boned, hardened enthusiast, a pop bottle cap served as the ball. I have vivid memories of my dad, for instance, showing my brothers and me the proper pitching technique. The trick was to let the spiked discus roll off his index finger with a snap of the wrist, sending it on a desperate parabola earthward, the waning flight of a cicada's last gasp. North St. Louisans were equally driven in formal sports, but to get in the game, it often took a lot to confront considerable barriers that they faced during segregation. Case in point, tennis. Richard Hudlin, a member of the famous family that grew up just outside St. Louis, was so accomplished that he captained the University of Chicago's tennis squad in college during the 1920s. He returned to St. Louis to teach at Sumner High and coached the secondary school's team as a side pursuit. To stay in shape all year long, Hudlin needed somewhere to practice indoors during the winter, but municipal tennis facilities such as the Armory blocked black players from playing. In 1945, however, Hudlin won a lawsuit that opened access. There are twin gems crowning Hudlin's legacy, both connected to his work with Black America's foremost tennis champions. Hudlin trained Althea Gibson, the first African-American to win the French Open, Wimbledon, and the U.S. Open. Hudlin also coached Arthur Ashe, the only black man to win Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, and the Australian Open. Hudlin connected with a young Ashe at the start of the 1960s. Ashe a prodigy in his teens, was barred from using indoor courts in his native Richmond, Virginia, to train during the winter. Hudlin took the budding star in, and Ashe finished high school at Sumner while honing his skills on the rapid-fire wood courts in the St. Louis Armory. Unfortunately, there is scant, if any, tribute to Ashe in St. Louis. Hudlin family descendants include the tennis mentor's great-nephews, Reginald and Warrington, who enjoy notoriety elsewhere as film directors of House Party and Boomerang. Their site hosts a page to honor Richard's contributions. Even so, it's a shame that finding any physical marker to pay formal homage to Richard takes more effort than it should. This despite Hudlin's direct link to black tennis titans. A park outside the city in the suburb of Richmond Heights was dedicated to him in 2018 and features a plaque. Courts named in his honor once stood just south of a major hospital complex near Kings Highway. A parking complex swallowed those up in recent memory, and all that remains is a plaque.